hosted by UVM Health Network with the Health Source Classes Program. And I'm Christine Buck, and I'm the coordinator of the Health Source Classes Program at UVM Medical Center. Health Source is a free educational program that offers classes on a wide variety of health and well-being topics, which are facilitated by our UVM Health Network experts and also our community partners like AgeWell. We're pleased to have this partnership with them, and as well as be able to offer these classes online, as they're now accessible to everyone in the entire UVM Health Network region and even beyond. And with this virtual world that we're, found ourselves in over the past year, we've had a few little hiccups along the way. So thanks for your patience. I want to apologize for the issue with the original meeting link this morning, but we're so glad that you're all here now. And I also just wanted to clarify, one of the promotions we did send out earlier this month accidentally did include some information about a different class that's actually happening next Tuesday on child passenger safety. So if you're here for a class on child passenger safety, we sincerely apologize for any confusion and inconvenience, but that class is being held next Tuesday. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tracy Schamberger from AgeWell. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everybody. My name is Tracy Schamberger. I'm the Director of Public Relations and Business Development at AgeWell. For those of you who may not know about AgeWell, I'd just like to provide a quick overview. AgeWell serves individuals that are 60 years of age and older, plus younger disabled individuals. We are committed to helping individuals age well by reducing barriers and providing access to healthy meals, such as Meals on Wheels, in-home and community resources. Our services are delivered by staff members and over 1,200 incredible volunteers. And our services are really designed to meet the diverse needs of our clients, their families, and caregivers. We do not charge for services provided, so I want to just make sure everybody knows if you need to call AgeWell, our helpline number is 1-800-642-5119. Couple of housekeeping issues I'd just like to bring up. I will be monitoring questions via the chat feature. Please mute your speakers during the presentation. We are recording this presentation, and Christine at UVM Medical Center will be sending you a link to the recording in an email along with a class evaluation, and we greatly appreciate your feedback. I am delighted to introduce my colleague and your presenter, Millie Richards. Millie has been AgeWell's caregiver support specialist since 2017. She grew up in a large extended family in northern Vermont, seeing up close how much love and effort caregivers devote to keeping their loved ones at home. Whether dealing with normal aging, cognitive decline, or a medical condition, caregivers face many hurdles and stressors while trying to make the best decisions for their families. Seeing the need for practical support for people choosing to age in place and the caregivers who support them, she reskilled in human services after a few years as a stay-at-home mom and re-entered the workforce, earning a professional certificate as an end-of-life doula from the Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont, and as a member of the inaugural class. Millie works to expand caregivers' natural supports through the promotion of self-care, skill building, support groups, memory cafes, and respite opportunities that help empower families to address the isolation so many experience. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm going to let Millie take it away.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm going to pop my screen up here. There'll be slides, and you'll see me again at the back side of this. Let's see. Ooh, computer's a little laggy today. Is it popping up? There we go. Okay, so I'm really excited to be able to share powerful tools for caregivers with all of you today. This is a class that means a lot to me to run. I've met some incredible people in the course of sharing this class with folks. And it really does support caregivers in a number of ways. So as Tracy mentioned, our Age Well mission is to provide the support and guidance that inspires our community to embrace aging with confidence. And a lot of folks in Vermont, especially, choose to age in place, which is only made possible through the efforts of unpaid family caregivers who support them in that decision to help them maintain their independence. I'm going to throw some general American statistics at you for a minute, but this is the most numbery part of the presentation here. Come on. Yeah. So 1 in 5 Americans is caregiving for a family member, friend, or neighbor. About 90% of those folks are caregiving for a family member, and about 10% are caring for a non-relative older person in their life who needs some support. About 25% of caregivers are caregiving for more than one person. Sometimes that looks like something we call the sandwich generation, a person who's caring for an aging parent, but maybe has school-age children. And sometimes that means it's a family with lots of caregiving needs in lots of different directions, maybe supporting aging in-law and your own parent, or having sort of multiple directions of caregiving at once. 63% of caregivers report that their loved one has one or more long-term physical conditions, and 32% are assisting someone with memory loss, such as Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia. Those two numbers are important here because when we think about caregiving, there are really 2 ways in general that we caregive. One is when an emergency comes up. So maybe your parent has a fall and breaks a bone and needs to go into the hospital and get some rehabilitative support before they can be on their own at home again. Or someone has an illness that is curable and you're dropping what you're doing to support that person through that illness. That's something that I think a lot of us have been able to do. Maybe we've taken some time off from work, suspended hobbies, given other things that are on our plate to other family members so that we can focus on the loved one with the acute need. But when you have a long-term physical condition or a progressive cognitive impairment, we're talking about marathon caregiving. And that looks very different. So taking time off from work isn't really sufficient or sustainable. Dropping all of your hobbies for the duration of caregiving, when it could last anywhere from 3 to 5 to 15 years or even longer, is not sustainable for your own mental health. So long-term caregiving, which is mostly who we're talking about when we talk about unpaid family caregivers, is really something that needs to be planned for, thought out, and really integrated into your whole life. It's not a temporary situation. Unfortunately, about 46% of caregivers feel that they have no choice. They're not choosing to support a family member's decision to stay home. They're not choosing to suspend their normal activities to care for someone. They feel that there's no other option for caring for that loved one. And that can be a significant stress that has a lot of different impacts on a family caregiver. So all caregivers, whether they felt that they had a choice in the decision to become caregivers or not, have a lot of different things going on in their caregiving situation that affect them. The first and kind of most obvious one for people is their physical health. So as a family caregiver in the long term, there can be significant changes to your sleep patterns, hobbies you used to engage in that gave you exercise. You may feel frazzled and not have a lot of time to prepare healthful meals. You may be changing your diet to meet the needs of the person you're caring for, who may have some real limits on what they can eat, and making 2 meals doesn't seem feasible, so you just eat what they eat, whether it's the best thing for you or not. Injuries happen for caregivers. A lot of caregivers are doing very physical labor in their caregiving journey, whether that's assisting someone in and out of bed, using a lift, or getting someone in and out of the bathtub. There's a real risk of injuring yourself as a caregiver. And then, of course, stress. Sometimes we think of stress as being a mental health issue, but stress has very, very physical consequences for your body. So I often tell caregivers when I'm talking to them and they say, oh, well, it's just stress and I know it'll pass. And stress kills, quite literally. So I've included it here amongst the physical health concerns. Other impacts for caregivers include social and emotional well-being issues. It can be a lot to change roles and become a caregiver to someone who was once a caregiver for you. So the changing scenery in your life, from going from someone's child to having them be reliant on you, can be really scary for some caregivers. And it can cause some grief about the loss of the relationship that once was. Caregivers and the people they care for are often very lonely. In a long-term caregiving situation, friends and other family members sometimes vanish, especially if there's a cognitive impairment in play. So families experiencing some kind of dementia often find that friends really don't understand or are distressed when visiting and just sort of drop off. They lose a lot of friendships. It can become incredibly difficult to take your loved one out into public situations. They can become very agitated or frightened. So even just basic things like going to the grocery store become difficult. And a lot of families end up homebound, even if there's only one person in the family who is suffering from the impairment. Depression and anxiety are very high in family caregivers. There's sort of an unknowing that comes in long-term caregiving. So you never know if your person's symptoms are going to change or when. You're never quite sure what the next day is going to bring, and that can really wear on people's mental health. And then there's sort of the grief we would expect, that the person you're caring for is maybe unwell or is declining, and you're seeing ahead to their end of life, and that can be really difficult to go through even while they're right in front of you. There's also anticipatory grief that happens all along the way when you're long-term caregiving. So the loss of someone's mobility, the days when they're not going to be able to have a conversation with you anymore. These things really cause a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of sadness, and they're complicated to work through. Another impact on folks who are caregiving is their financial stability. So not only is in-home care or the materials of caregiving expensive for families, sometimes those costs are coming out of the caregiver's pocket themselves rather than the person who needs care. And sometimes employment is impacted. Caregivers drop out of the workforce. They just have to sometimes quit their job to be with the person they need to care for, or they retire early. And these things impact their financial future as well, not just for the time that they're caregiving, but it affects how much they're putting into, say, Social Security, what their employment background and history look like. So taking a few years off to care for a loved one can seriously impact your financial solvency yourself in the future. Given those, it's not all bad. Caregivers, they have needs, but they also have resources. And a lot of caregivers find caregiving to be fulfilling. They get a chance to spend time with their loved one that they might not otherwise have spent. So how can we, both we being AgeWell with my AgeWell hat on, but we as a community support the needs of caregivers? At AgeWell, we have a lot of solutions for our caregivers. We have our volunteer program, as Tracy mentioned. We have financial supports. We help people navigate the state financial system, such as like a long-term care Medicaid program. We offer grants to family caregivers. So right off the bat, we've got some resources as soon as a caregiver reaches out to us. And as I speak with caregivers, I get a sense of what different things they need in their lives. These are sort of the top few things that caregivers need. The first is always, and I will say this in every realm, in every soapbox that you give me, caregivers need affordable, reliable respite. It is imperative that caregivers take a break from caregiving, preferably on some kind of reliable schedule so that they can make their own health appointments, so that they can engage in hobbies, so they can maintain social relationships, and just to get some relief from the responsibilities of being a caregiver. There are lots of different ways people can find respite opportunities. They can hire in-home care providers. They can make use of adult day programs for their loved ones. They can sometimes in an emergency, or if someone's traveling, there's something called a short-term institutional respite stay where a nursing home or other senior living facility will take someone for a short period of time. We have respite volunteers at AgeWell when COVID is not a factor, who will go into people's homes and spend time with them. But really, my focus on respite is making sure that families have a plan within their own natural social scaffolding. So whether that's an aunt or a cousin or a sibling who's far away, who makes the effort to come and be with that person so that you can get out and just take a break. It's really necessary, whether it's paid or friends and family. The next is financial support, and I mentioned long-term care Medicaid programs. Those can help people stay in their homes and offer in-home care providers. There are respite grants. There are grants to help people with safety equipment that they need to reduce the chances that they'll hurt themselves as caregivers, things like shower bars, and then social connectedness. Our community in the greater Burlington area has a wealth of social ways that caregivers can get out. There are memory cafes, there are support groups, there are all sorts of free and low-cost musical things that people can attend, again, outside of COVID. But for caregivers in more rural areas, there's a real concern that folks stay home and don't get the contact with friends and loved ones that they need. So as a community, it's important to remember, if you haven't seen a family for a while in a place you normally saw them, whether that's your faith community, your town's ice cream social, even if you just haven't bumped into them at the library for a while, reach out. Families really need just to know that they haven't been forgotten. Caregivers also need education and training for their individual roles. So a lot of family caregivers are doing pretty significant medical intervention for the person they're caring for, and making sure that they feel comfortable and confident changing incontinence supplies, safely moving people, helping people use their mobility aids in the right way, or redirecting someone who has a dementia. Education and training is really important, and it's luckily available in a lot of sources. So I tend to suggest caregivers reach out to whatever organizations support the diagnosis of the person they're caring for, whether that's something like the Alzheimer's Association or the Parkinson's Association, or informational classes like UVM's Health Source series, to really get a sense of what's going on in the person they're caring for's condition and how they can best support it. And then the next is just strategies for maintaining their own health and well-being. And that's where our Powerful Tools for Caregivers class comes in. Here we go. Powerful Tools is a 6-week evidence-based program It was developed by a nonprofit out in Oregon. It's being currently folded in to the Iowa State University Education and Outreach Center. It's evidence-based, which means it's been presented in the same way to groups of people with data collected to see what the outcomes were for caregivers. And it really is shown to improve self-care, reduce stress, help people with goal setting, problem solving. It helps people make confident decisions as caregivers, and it increased the amount of interaction that caregivers had with the resources in their communities, whether that be support groups or education or agencies like an area agency on aging, like we are. Because it's evidence-based, it uses a train-the-trainer model, and it's facilitated from a script. So in this way, the producers of this program know that no matter who is sponsoring the program, whether it's a senior center or a church or AgeWell or the hospital, people are still getting the same quality information. And it comes with something called the Caregiver Help Book. Now, this book is the basics of the class in the first half, and it follows through all of the same things we talk about in the 6 weeks of the course. But the back half of the book is a resource on all kinds of different caregiving situations. So if you're caregiving for a veteran, if you're caregiving for someone who has hearing issues, if you're caregiving for someone who's suffering from a cognitive decline, if you're not sure whether or not it's time to talk to dad about not driving anymore, all these things are covered in the back half of the book. So it really is designed to be a great resource for families. It's not just absorb what you can for the class. They're left with both contact with local resources, such as the Caregiver Support Program that we have, and this great book that helps them look things up in the moment or as their person's diagnosis changes. So the Powerful Tools course is a series of 90-minute classes. We scheduled 2 hours for the 90-minute classes because there's always lots of questions and we want to make sure that people have a chance to share. The first week really focuses on taking care of yourself. And for some caregivers, this is the first time they've sort of been given permission to focus on themselves. A lot of times when I speak with caregivers, the first thing they want to tell me about is the person they're caring for. So this is a really big change for some people, and it takes sometimes a few weeks before they're really comfortable with the idea that they're focusing on themselves. The second week is identifying and reducing personal stress, and I'm going to walk you through that module of the class exactly as it's run in an in-person or online version of the class when we run it. Then we talk about communicating feelings, needs, and concerns in week 3, communicating in challenging situations in week 4, learning from our emotions in week 5, which has a focus on guilt, anger, depression, and really seeking help if your emotions are further from where you need to be than you're comfortable with. And then week 6 is all about making caregiving decisions and empowering caregivers to feel confident that they're doing the best job they can do for the person that they love. So I'm going to jump right in. Normally when we teach Powerful Tools, there are brainstorming sessions. In this little demo version, I'm going to ask you to think about a couple of things that you would be talking about together out loud in a class if we were running it in real time. But hopefully that will still help you in the future. If you've got a little piece of scrap paper handy, you may even want to write some things down that pop into your head as we come up to those things. This is a little bit different. It's normally a co-facilitated class with 2 facilitators kind of bantering back and forth, but this should be pretty close to what spending some time in the class is really like. Each class starts with an action plan, which is a tool that's learned in the first week that helps caregivers set goals and focus on their self-care. After that, each class goes through the agenda for the day. So normally this class would be all of the things you see here on the screen. There's solution seeking for the action plans. There's little modules about what we're talking about, and then tool after tool after tool. So in this little demo, we're just going to do signs and sources and stress reducers. We're not going to do the positive self-talk or make an action plan or do the breath exercises, but Powerful Tools does always end with some kind of relaxation. And I hope that after this webinar, you'll take a minute for yourself and do something to just relax and get whole before you go back to whatever it is you're doing today. It is a scripted class, and so I've had to take out a few things to make it fit in here, but we'll do the best we can. So, stress is the reaction we experience when the demands placed on us are too much to cope with. While some stress can be positive, too much stress can affect us in negative ways, both physically and emotionally. As caregivers, one of the most important things we can do, both for ourselves and for our family member, is to take care of ourselves. It's important that you thrive, not just survive your caregiving experience. An important tool for thriving is being able to recognize and manage our stress. So there are 4 steps to managing stress, and the first is recognizing warning signs early. So it's easier and more helpful to make changes to reduce our stress if we catch it early. If we wait till we're overwhelmed, it takes a lot longer for us to recover. The second is to identify our sources of stress. So really just asking ourselves, what's causing stress for me? What causes the most stress? And that can be really different from caregiver to caregiver. The third is to identify what you can and cannot change. This involves asking, what do I have control over? What can I change? Sometimes even a small change can make a difference, but when we're struggling to change something that we really have no control over, we just increase our stress and cause frustration. And the fourth is to take action. So doing something to reduce our stress can help give us a sense of control, even if the situation that's stressing us out is not within our control. Doing all 4 of these steps is really critical to self-care. So, and the person that we're caring for also benefits. We're most likely to be patient and loving if we're taking good care of ourselves. So if we were to identify our own signs and sources of stress, it really just means a very simple thing, just asking ourselves, what are these warning signs of stress? And what are the sources? So each one of us has warning signs that tell us when we're experiencing stress. And if we can identify and respond to them, we can prevent some of the destructive impact that stress can have, both on our mental health and our physical health. Too often, though, we don't recognize the early warning signs or we ignore them. So if you just ask yourself just quickly, and I know we don't have the capacity to all weigh in together, but what is a warning sign of stress for you? And what is a source of stress for you? And this can be caregiving related, it could be related to your job, it could be related to your household, anything at all. When we brainstorm this together in the Powerful Tools class, we start a list. If we're in person, we're writing on a great big whiteboard with markers. When we're doing it online, we're typing it into the chat together. And you can see on this slide here some really common warning signs and sources of stress. Notice that there are check marks here on some of these, and this is because a lot of these sources and warning signs are shared between caregivers. So whenever someone lets us know what their warning sign is, if it's something someone shares, we just keep adding check marks. When we do this in person, sometimes we get quite a lot of check marks along one side of these. So some really common warning signs are forgetfulness and irritability, crying, trouble with concentrating, high blood pressure. And some of these sources are having too much to do. For folks who are dealing with a cognitive issue, there's a lot of dementia symptoms that can cause stress, such as repeated questions. Family disagreements are really common with caregivers. It's very common for me to work with families who are struggling not only with their role change with the person that they're caring for, but with some real difficulties either with their existing relationships like their own marriage or their sibling relationships. This is a really, really common thing. Interruptions, just not being able to finish anything because you're constantly stopping what you're doing to take care of the person you're caring for. All these things really contribute to stress for caregivers. So remember that the earlier we identify those warning signs, the better. And as you're looking at these warning signs, note that some of these are probably not the early warning signs. They're probably the later warning signs. So the further back you can go when you're identifying your own stress, the better. Is forgetfulness or headaches and muscle tension really the first sign? Or is irritability maybe an earlier sign for you, or that lack of concentration? It's important we pay attention to the very earliest signs and respond to them. The results of neglecting our stress are increased health problems. Stress really does affect your immune system and increases your vulnerability to illness. It can also worsen existing medical conditions. So if you have high blood pressure or a heart problem to begin with, stress can really make that worse. Neglecting stress can disrupt your relationships. It can cause a breakdown in communication with others, whether that's the person you're caring for, other members of your care team, or people outside of your caregiving role. Burnout. So burnout is really just the total physical and emotional exhaustion that can come from stress. And caregiver burnout is something, unfortunately, is a reason I get a lot of referrals in my role at AgeWell. Folks will end up in the hospital because they have let the stress carry on into their body to the point that they can no longer function and they're not safe. Depression, which can range from just kind of feeling down or hopeless to full-on medically diagnosable major depression. In the 5th class, we talk more about emotions, including depression, what to watch out for, and how to get help if you are at risk of self-harm or suicide. And then a decreased quality of care. So if we're stressed out, it's hard for us to be the best caregivers that we can be. And nobody goes into a caregiving role thinking, I just want to be an okay caregiver. I just want my person to, survive. We all want the person we're caring for to be cared for and loved and to feel that the love and the effort that we've put in to this role. The third important step in managing stress is to really identify what you can and can't change. So this chart shows 3 approaches that you can use to make changes in a stressful situation. So there are 3 possible tools here we can use, and they probably won't eliminate our stress, but they can definitely help us reduce it. The first is to change a situation. So when possible, like if a stress for me is that the person I'm caring for leaves the stove on, I could remove the knobs on the stove or turn the burners off at the breaker. Sometimes it's really something that's simple and fixable that we do have control over. Sometimes we can change our perception. So instead of thinking, I'm frustrated that my adult son does not visit his father often enough, you can change your view to say, I'm thankful for the times that my son does take the time to visit his father. It shows that he does care. This one gets a lot of giggles when we teach the powerful tools class, because folks are like, yeah, well, I still want them to do what I want them to do. So changing the perception, I think, might be one of the harder tools that people use in powerful tools, and it really does take some practice. The next is changing your response. So sometimes we can't change something, but we can change how we react. So if you're stressed out because your mom is repeatedly asking you, what time do we eat? A half hour before dinner. And you just keep saying, you've asked me this 10 times. We always eat at 5:30. Don't you remember? Instead, you could just choose a part of the dinner to have out an hour ahead. So a little snack of something healthy that you were going to incorporate to the sit-down meal can make a massive difference in getting those repeated questions, feeling under pressure to hurry up and get things ready. So just changing how you do things or how you respond to things can make a big difference when you're caregiving. So recognizing those early warning signs, identifying the source of our stress, and then identifying changes we can make are the first three pieces of how to identify and manage your stress. The fourth step is to take action. If we don't do anything after we identify those warning signs, we haven't really gained much. We maybe spent some time thinking about it and stressed ourselves out more, in fact. Really actively doing something to reduce our stress is that next step, but it's really hard to get tangled up and find barriers to taking that action. Some really common barriers to taking action are not being able to think of what to do. The next exercise in the class is to do a little brainstorm of things we can do to reduce stress. So sometimes it can help to pre-prepare for things that you need help with stress. And this is true not just for stress relief, but for things like repeated questions. If you give yourself a few standard answers and practice them, it'll be a lot more natural when you need to redirect someone. The next is choosing a difficult activity. So sometimes what we really want to do to relieve our stress is something out of our reach. Making sure we're picking something achievable is really important. So something that's not too involved, that's not too awkward, that's not too time consuming. And sometimes we pick an activity that we don't want to do, but that we feel like we should do. And that can really kind of dampen our motivation to take that action. The next is postponing our stress reduction. So sometimes people plan a stress reduction activity that's way too far in the future. So you decide you need a respite break, but you've got your heart set on a vacation that you're not going to take for 6 months. That's a positive thing to make plans for 6 months from now, and looking forward to that date can really be helpful, but you need something now that you can do. So making sure that you're choosing an activity that's reachable in the short term. If you postpone your stress reduction until when it's convenient, or postpone stress reduction, even just a few days, it's not going to be as effective as if you do a small thing now to help. Stress reducers are activities that help us relax, are soothing and pleasurable, make us feel good, and most importantly, as we just discussed, things that we can build into our life on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can just be a few minutes a day. And sometimes it's something totally free that you can do on the spot, that you can do while waiting in line at the grocery store. At this point in the class, we normally ask folks to tell us all the different things they do to reduce their stress. But here's a sample of common answers to that brainstorm. Stress reducers such as walking, finding the humor in situations, listening to music, reading a book, going to bed earlier. Sometimes self-care doesn't look like bubble baths and candles. Sometimes self-care looks like eating your vegetables and going to bed on time. taking a bubble bath, going swimming, watching a movie, deep breathing, meditation, delegating responsibilities. Now, this is on this brainstorm example list, but I have not once had a caregiver in a real-time class suggest this as part of the brainstorm. I can tell you it is one of the best things you can possibly do as a caregiver. Take something off your plate. A lot of times we're reluctant to give someone a task that is part of our caregiving. I'm not going to ask my neighbor necessarily to come over and change mom, but I could ask the neighbor to weed whack the edge of my yard when he's doing his own. I could ask a friend to run out to the pharmacy for me. There are lots of ways you can delegate small things that are already on your plate that are not necessarily things that have to do with your care receiver, and you'll get a massive reward for this in stress reduction. And it helps you maintain those social connections that you need as well. And exercise is a great one. The most recent time we ran Powerful Tools, most of the answers to this stress reducers question were exercise and art related. And I thought that was really great. So keep in mind that stress reducers are really personal, and things that work for other people might not work for you. But making a list of the things that you can do is really helpful, because when you're stressed out, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to come up with what you're going to do. I always suggest pre-preparing a list like this of things you can do. And the Powerful Tools class offers a bunch of things like deep breathing exercises and meditation and guided imagery. They have a couple of them that are available for download on their website, which is here on this slide. But you can use YouTube. There are hundreds of apps for this. You could sign up for a community center class, even over Zoom, even during COVID, for things that help you relax and unwind and take care of yourself. So I hope those tools were helpful to you. If your response to stress is mostly physical, you might want to try a physical relaxation activity like swimming or walking or taking a bike ride. If you are a worrier and you have difficulty concentrating, you might want to try mental relaxation like these things offered here. And if your stress is both physical and mental, look for something like Tai Chi or yoga that combines both of those things. Any plan to reduce your stress is more successful if you're realistic about it. And the action plan tool that Powerful Tools teaches is a great way to put small new habits into effect. So that's Powerful Tools in a nutshell. We'll include this slideshow with the presentation, and there are descriptions of the classes, and the AgeWell newsletter will be the place to go to find out when our next class is scheduled. And I know we don't have a ton of time left for questions, but we've got some. So how are we doing there, Tracy? Any questions?
I actually am not seeing anything in the chat. So if you do have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself right now and send and ask your questions to Millie. Christine will be sending out a link to our AgeWell newsletter so you can sign up to find out when that class is going to be offered again, along with information about the AgeWell helpline if you do also want to get someone from our information and assistance team to provide you with any resources or support. So please feel free now to unmute yourself if you do have a question.
Are the classes right now all going to be via Zoom or meeting, or are there in-person classes?
Right now, they're all online, and I'm working with the caregiver support staff at all of the area agencies on aging in Vermont to try to make sure that we're offering them on a quicker rotation, since we have the freedom to do that over Zoom. But I So I've taught this class both ways, and I really prefer the in-person class. I think it helps to get a break from the person you're caring for and leave the house and come out and sit with me. They're definitely not pivoting to an online only model. We'll probably continue to run them both ways, because I was definitely able to reach some folks who were not able to physically make it to the office to come in for a class. At 6 weeks is a lot of weeks in a row to set up respite care so that you can come out. But we can always talk with people about hiring in-home care or using an adult day program, so their person is safe and cared for and they don't have that extra stress of wondering what's going on at home while I'm out here. So we'll definitely make that distinction in the newsletter when we run the class, whether it's going to be the online version or whether we'll be running it in one of our office spaces or with a community partner. And I am totally open to people suggesting places that I can run it that might reach people who are a little more geographically isolated. Since AgeWell serves Franklin, Grand Isle, Chittenden, and Addison counties, you can imagine running a class down in Colchester isn't super helpful for someone in Richford. And if I'm running a class in the St. Albans office, people from Virgins are not really going to make that trek. So definitely open to alternative sites for getting together with groups of people.
Thank you.
Millie, while we're waiting to see if anyone else has a question, I just thought you mentioned a few things about how AgeWell may be able to support caregivers. Could you just talk a little bit about some of the services that if someone were to call in on the helpline, they may say, I know you're a caregiver and here are the ways that we may be able to support you as a caregiver? Because I know when I was listening to the presentation, I was thinking, it's great to be able to do all of your recommendations are so helpful in terms of relieving stress, particularly, going swimming or getting out for a walk. And I'm sure that caregivers, I was trying to put myself in that position thinking, well, how am I going to go out and do that if I'm caregiving for someone? So I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That is by far the #1 barrier for folks who are trying to take care of themselves. We do focus in the class a lot on activities that you can do at home, even with the person you're caring for present. But for most people, one of the things they really need is to just get away and take their brain out of that caregiving space for a minute. So I always tell people to cast a really wide net when asking for help. Caregivers, as a rule, are reluctant to accept help for a lot of different reasons. They either don't want to burden people, or they fear that the person they're caring for won't accept another person coming in to care for them, or they feel like they're the only person who really gets their person's cues and communication style. Like, how could I leave my husband with a stranger when nobody really understands but me when he's indicating that he needs to get up and use the restroom or when he's hungry? But in the long term, it's much better for that person for you to get out and take that walk. So casting a wide net, asking friends a circle further than you would think that you want to, is often a really great way to get someone to help you, to come in, even just for a little while. Somebody who's a neighbor who drives home from work at the same time every day and doesn't mind stopping in, even for 20 minutes or a half an hour, just to visit with your person and play cards. And in that time, you can just take a minute. That's the best way to go. But we can also connect caregivers with resources that can help them make use of paid care. So I mentioned adult day programs and in-home care providers. AgeWell has a list of in-home care providers to help you make those calls and see who you can arrange care with. We have different ways of looking for funding for you or helping walk you through what is or isn't appropriate for you to be spending on your individual budget. We have options counselors. We have our helpline staff that gives fantastic advice. And if you need a little more help and a little more problem solving and a little more hands-on caregiver education or research, we have me. And you can get a referral for a caregiver support, and we'll spend some time. I'll do an assessment on what your family needs, the whole family. We'll talk a lot about who you have in your life that you can kind of activate as a helper, and I can help connect you with funding for family caregivers. It's very small funding, but it's enough to get a little break here and there. It's a respite fund just to get you that little bit of a break that you need.
That's great, Millie. Thank you. I know the other piece is that AgeWell has, as I mentioned earlier, a very large support volunteer network. And you may also find that having an AgeWell volunteer come in. Millie's so excited as I talk about this. Go ahead, Millie.
I'm so torn on the volunteer problem because so many of our volunteers are benched right now because of COVID, and they are dying to get into people's homes and help them. And I've actually developed, with the help of the director of our volunteer program, who has a hospice background, a training for respite volunteers. It's a 4-week class where they learn all kinds of skills for helping a family with a significant need. So we focus a lot in that class on dementia. And if you're a family who has a loved one that's maybe hard to leave with a friend or a neighbor, you're not sure they'll be able to kind of handle that situation, we have respite volunteers who are trained and available, and we match them up with families and they form a relationship. And they serve that family with usually like a 3-hour-a-week visit. They are volunteers. We don't ask them to do physically demanding tasks or personal care, but they're trained in redirection strategies. They're trained in understanding people's cues and alternative communication and all sorts of skills that will help you feel confident that they can sit with your loved one and really make that work for you while you go out to a doctor's appointment or go bowling or go play some golf, whatever it is that you want to do. The important piece is that it's a reliable break that you can plan around and schedule around. And in addition to those trained respite volunteers, we also have a really robust friendly visitor program. And those are folks who just want to come play cards, chat, do puzzles, go for walks. They may not be as inclined to help families that have a significant medical need, but a lot of times, you know, all a caregiver really needs is to just know someone has eyes on their person. And our friendly visitors are amazing at that. And they're really in it to form connections. They're looking, you know, they're not looking to be a warm body that sits on your couch while your loved one watches Westerns. They're looking to be there and engage with your family member and really bring something to the relationship for both of them. So yeah, I love our volunteer program and I can't wait until they can get back into people's homes. But stay tuned for more COVID opening information on when our volunteers can really be part of your lives again.
Terrific. If there are any other questions, now would be a great time. We want to make sure.
John?
Oh, John, do you have a question?
John? If you scroll over, there should be a big round microphone button on the bottom of the screen, but you have to scroll over it to get to it. Or you can type into the chat and Tracy can read it out.
Let me see if I can unmute John. John, do you see 3 little dots that's like a little circle on next to on your picture screen? You click onto that, you should be able to go to something that says unmute me. And I can't unmute him, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm not seeing.
You can always call the helpline with any other questions that you have. And Christine will send along the information from this presentation, so you'll have that as well. Any other wrapping up housekeeping?
Just to thank you for all of you for being here, whether you're here for yourself or to assist someone else, or you know of someone who needs some support with caregiving. You know, it's a hard job and it's a lot of responsibility, and AgeWell is here to support you. And we're really grateful that we have people like Millie and our volunteers, and we want to just make sure you feel supported on your journey as a caregiver. So without any other housekeeping, thank you again for being here. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for spending your time with us. And lovely comment that says, thanks, lots of great information from one of our participants. Thank you both. So thank you. And, you know, the AgeWell helpline, anyone can call the AgeWell helpline. That's the other thing I always like to, AgeWell is sort of known to be the agency on aging that serves people 60 and older and those with under 60 with a disability. But you do not have to be 60 to call our helpline. Anybody can call our helpline. We encourage it. And Christine is going to follow up in sending information, and that will include information about the helpline. The helpline is available from 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. But you can also always on the weekends call 211. So with that,
Also, if you're anywhere else in Vermont besides our service area, it will connect you to the area agency on aging in your area. So that helpline number is for all Vermonters who have anything they want to ask about any older Vermonter.
Exactly. Terrific. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you very much, Millie. Great presentation. I always learn so much, and we appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Millie.